Welcome back to Rust Bucket Rehab. Today I am going to be working on the fuel system of this CL340. Now, I always split up these videos because, number one, when you're doing a lot of repairs to something, it would be an extremely long video. Number two, I like to be able to just reference different parts of the project that I'm working on. That said, the fuel system of our CL340 is definitely not the way that the CL340 was designed. But if you have one of the old lift fuel pumps in your CL340, again, this is a Wisconsin VH4D motor, which is when you're doing motor repairs, that's probably more important than just knowing what machine I'm working on, because anybody working with a VH4D motor is going to be experiencing the same things that I'm working on here. So, back to what I was talking about. The fuel system in this is not the same. If you have the old lift fuel pump, which is it kind of is a very old pump that would kind of it has a lift valve in it, and that pumps the fuel through and into the carburetor. If you have one of those and it's gone bad, they can be expensive to replace. So I understand why the people who had this before us set this system up the way that they did. They put on, this is a Mr. Gasket, yeah, Mr. Gasket fuel pump, and it was kind of, you know, they've converted this machine to an electric fuel pump versus the old lift pump. This is a pretty simple design. I'm sticking with it. He also used motorcycle fuel filters, which I thought was kind of a smart idea as well. So we are going to put this back the way that he had it before. We have two gas tanks, so we have two lines coming into the fuel pump, and then the fuel pump goes out to the motor. So I'll be putting this back together. Now, I don't know if this fuel pump works, and I'm not going to order a replacement for the fuel pump until I confirm that it's bad and doesn't work. What I did get are new fuel filters, and these are also Mr. Gasket fuel filters. They're designed for your motorcycle, but he was using them on here. I think I can use them on here as well. Now, the ones that I purchased were the universal fuel filters. The ones I got look a little smaller than what he had on there before. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference here, because I'm sure the flow on these is going to be fairly similar. And again, I'm pulling from two gas lines, so I'm not too concerned about the size. But I wanted to get a universal, and I'll put the link below, and if everything works, then you'll know that these would work. I wanted to get a universal because the universals come with a lot of different fittings, and on one side of this I had no fittings. That's how this one was. And then on the other side we actually did have some fittings. And you could buy them like this, or you can buy them like this and then have a set of universal fittings. So I just went universal. I think it's kind of a genius way of making sure everything's going to work. Now, ooh, that is a tight fit for sure. Part of me believes that the previous owner just found parts in his garage and attached them to it. But as long as it ran and it operated, that's what is the most important to me. It is like screwing on without stopping. There's my answer to that. I totally just broke the plastic filter on there. So keep in mind that these Mr. Gasket fuel filters are they're glass and plastic. This older one that I have here is actually metal and glass. Given what just happened with that one, I'm debating on whether I want to use that. If you're going to use those, I would definitely screw them on very carefully. That just screwed on to the point that it cracked, rendering the whole thing useless in my opinion. This one doesn't look too bad. It's just got a bad filter on it. This filter has a lot of rust in there, which means the gas tank probably has rust in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some cleaner. I'm going to clean this out, and then, if possible, this righty-tighty. I'm going to try and pull that out of there. I'm going to get the filter out of this one and see if I can just swap it around. And I may even use the glass. It's going to save me from having to do more cleaning. There's a gasket in there. I don't think my gasket's bad. That came with it. So I'm going to put that filter on. Oh, I see. It doesn't appear that that's going to work. So right now I'm just kind of switching around the parts and taking parts off the new fuel filter and putting them on the old one, because the old one is just better constructed. I don't know if if you have an option when you order of metal versus what appears to be kind of a chrome plated plastic, or how that works, but if you can get your hands on these metal ones, that's definitely the way that I would go. Now, that is going to pose a problem. My filter doesn't quite fit that way. There we go. I'm going to take the new glass and slide it into the old filter. So I didn't really even have to do much cleaning there, because I was able to replace enough of the parts that, look at that, it's good as new. I've got a metal tip here versus this kind of plastic crap. And then fuel in, fuel out, so we'll put the outside towards our fuel filter. Now that one tightened up the way that I was kind of expecting it to. In doing the other side, I may try and do the same thing, because if that's all plastic and this is metal, I'd rather be working with the metal. Now this fuel filter obviously looks like it's been through a lot, so there's no telling what I'm about to find in here. If I can even get it to open up. There we go. Nicely done. Now this is a very corroded looking fuel filter. I may have to go with the plastic on this side. I'm gonna have to toss this one, I think. So we'll go with our other plastic, Mr. Gasket. I am sure that the plastic ones work fine. They just, they're a little more breakable. So here we go, we've got it. Out, inside, outside. I need to find a tip that matches my old tip. That looks like it. That looks a little narrow. I think that'll work. One way we can test this is with our fuel lines. Yeah, that's probably a good size for it. Now, this is the outside. It'd be very bad to have fuel leaking on you, so I want to make sure that getting these things tight, but then you also have to make sure you don't break the plastic on these Mr. Gasket filters. So I am using the 5/16 plugs for this system, which means our fuel lines are 5/16. So the inside goes to the fuel tank, the outside comes down into our system here. Okay, so this is basically how our fuel pump system is set up. Our next step will be to connect this back into the skid steer. Now he had this mounted on the back side of the skid steer here. I'll show you how that is set up. There's basically just two holes that this mounts into on a bottom plate just below the cooling fan, and then we've got one line that'll run underneath the cooler for our hydraulic fluid over to our right side tank, and then the left side tank just has a hose somewhere around here on the ground that will connect from this filter into the left side tank. I'm going to start reinstalling this fuel pump, and we're going to do this left side tank first, and then we'll make our way over to the right side tank. I've run into an interesting problem. Shauna is going to love this when she sees this, but I have actually lost one of my fuel lines. I know, I have a bad habit of losing parts sometimes. The fuel line that I have misplaced is this left side fuel line. I wanted to see how close I got to the other side with the other fuel line, but it looks like it's just kind of gonna fit there perfectly. So this is kind of an unfortunate situation, but I did find a 1/4 inch line, which I think will work fine as a fuel line. The problem is that what it looks like there's already a 5/16 adapter on there, but it's actually a Mr. Gasket adapter, one of the plastic ones. I ought to be able to remove that, and then I can put on my 1/4 inch line in replace of the 5/16 line. I'm hoping, because I've got two fuel sources, that this will not cause a problem for the fuel flow. I don't see how it could. Let's see if I can get this thing. One thing I have learned about doing any type of mechanical work is that they really don't give you a whole lot of room to work inside motors. The other thing I have learned is that mechanics have a lot of patience to do what they do. So what I'm messing with here is down at the very bottom of the fuel tank. There is a kind of a gas line coming out with a nipple on it. I'm trying to remove that nipple because it's a 5/16 nipple, and I'm trying to replace it with a 1/4 inch so that the gas line that I found will work. And again, I could always get a 5/16 line and put this back if there seems to be a flow issue, but because I have the 2 tanks on this, I'm hoping that it's not going to restrict my gas flow enough to really make a difference. So we've got our new 1/4 inch nipple on there, and then we need to put a 1/4 inch nipple on our fuel filter because we're putting a 1/4 inch line. And then we've got our 1/4 inch nipple, which is going to go on the fuel filter itself. Okay. So this one should be ready to go. Here's our new 1/4 inch line, gas line. And this gas line is a pretty short gas line, so I'm going to have to cut that. Go ahead and attach that. Now I've got the gas line that goes out to the carburetor right here, covered in a plastic bag. I'm going to go ahead and get this ready. Let's see. If I can, I'd like to pull that out of there. Okay, so kind of another, well, I would say big problem that I had when I took this out is this piece here should be seated into the fuel pump, and when I pulled it, when I tried to pull the gas line off, it actually removed it from the pump. So what I'm going to do is I want to very carefully remove the gas line from this, save as much of the gas line as I can, because I do have a pretty tight space going back into the carburetor. But this needs to come out. There we go. Then I'm going to remove this old piece of rubber from the gas line. And then somehow I need to try and reseat this into our pump. If you do something like this, I would suggest you use a rubber mallet. So I've got that seated back into the pump. this is our line that goes up and connects with our carburetor. So I'm going to go ahead and push that on, and this is a 5/16. So most of the lines on this are 5/16 gas lines, but this one that I've replaced here is just a 1/4-inch gas line until I can find either the old one or go and buy some more 1/4-inch gas line. But since I have 2 tanks feeding this pump, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm telling you, these Southwire screwdrivers, when you're doing these repairs, awesome things. So this is it. Up to the carburetor, the 2 fuel lines coming into the pump, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put everything back into place. Now this fuel filter kind of tucks under here. These are our power lines right here to our fuel pump. I'm not sure where those go yet. I'll trace them down. I don't need to do any work to those, but I'll trace them down for those of you who are thinking about changing your setup to have an electronic pump like this one. Now, let's see. The way that this was put together, the fuel pump kind of bolts down on this. Looks like there's some sort of metal tray. I don't know if that was installed by the previous owner. It looks as though it might have been welded on. So this could be a modification. If I knew more about these in general, I would know if it was a modification or if it was supposed to be that way. Reconnect my power. That should be good to go. I'll just have to go back into the motor here and reconnect the carburetor. It's not going to be fun to reach. Really. Okay. This copper line here runs out and into our carburetor, so just have to screw that into place. That should be good to go. Yeah, he had a clamp right there to keep that off of the motor, but that should hold on its own just where it is. Okay. So that's pretty much it. We just rebuilt our fuel lines, and we've done the carburetor, we've repaired the manifold. The manifold seems to be holding up with the JP weld and the new spot where we had caked it on there. So our next step is to change the oil filter, pour some oil in here so we can finish our oil change, and then ignition switch, and try and start up and see what happens. So the fuel pump lines, they come up right here, and it looks to me there's some sort of wiring harness underneath here. And it really looks like our fuel pump lines pretty much go up. The ground connects to the frame up underneath the seat there with the other grounds, and the red appears to go into our ignition switch. So I'm guessing that when I turn on the switch, it primes the fuel, and then we start it from there. So if you switch one of these over, right down in here is the old lifter pump. But if you switch over to doing one with an electric fuel pump, it doesn't look like it's a very complicated situation.